Good morning. My name is John Duffy, and I'm with the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the North Shore Unitarian Church, where our mission is to empower people to live with greater depth, meaning, and purpose. One of the things I love about coming to church is it gets me out of my day-to-day life focused on me and my family, and it makes me think about a broader community, whether it's my church community or the global community, and I like that. In this community, we celebrate people from all walks of life, no matter how you make your living or how you experience the sacred, no matter who you are or who you love. We hope you will feel welcome here.
And good morning once again on this drizzly day. It's so nice to see all of these bright faces. My name is Ariel, and my work here is all about helping you make meaningful connections in this congregation. And so I'd like to extend an extra welcome to any newcomers or visitors that we have this morning. If you would like to know more about us, we'd ask you to sign in with your contact information on the iPad that's in the foyer, and also to let you know that there are friendly volunteers wearing greeter buttons who would be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this congregation or our tradition. And I'd like to invite everybody, newcomers and longtime members, to come downstairs after the service for tea and coffee and conversation. And today we have gourmet sandwiches as well for sale. So I have a number of announcements this morning. Next month, we'll be exploring the theme of perseverance, and Reverend Marcus is going to be making a collage of voices from your stories, and would love to have a few more stories. This is for next Sunday's service. When you've been going through hell, what's kept you going? What has enabled you to get through the dark nights of your soul? If you have a story about a time like that you'd be willing to share, please talk to Reverend Marcus after the service. And tonight we have an intergenerational potluck starting at 5, so please bring a dish to share and stay for games afterwards. Everyone is welcome to that. And today, right here in the sanctuary at 12:15, we'll be having the annual congregational meeting to approve the budget for 2018, as well as vote on the proposed location of our new building site. And because of that meeting, please feel free to bring your sandwich upstairs so that the meeting can start promptly. Or if you'd rather, you can pull out a table and chairs if you'd rather eat downstairs.
I'm going to tell you a little story about mistakes. I'm not the only one to make mistakes. I'm sure we've all made mistakes, and there's so many different kinds to make, really. And just saying, some of them you really can't work around, and some of them you can. But I thought I'd do it in the context of making music. As some of you know, I'm in the band, and every now and then we come and we play. We rehearse in order to make it perfect, if we can. And when we stand up and we are ready to begin, before us are 1,000 notes to be placed in perfect order. And if you can get through 1,000 notes in perfect order, you really feel good about yourself. And as the notes click by, you start to notice that you're not doing it the same way as you'd rehearsed. And 1 or 2, not a problem. 5 or 6, hey, it's okay. 7 or 8, okay. And then there's some that are really hard to get around. The very first time I played music publicly, I was in a church, not like this, and I failed to start. I was so nervous. Well, you can't really work around that one. Luckily, I was with somebody else who did start, so. However, every now and again, you get into a very odd scene with music, and that is you think it was perfect as far as we went. And then Malcolm over here sends us the recording of what we did. And there is the strangest thing in music, which is live music. You don't notice some of the pitch problems and the tempo problems. But when it's recorded, your critical faculty comes up. And so you think, oh my gosh, I was in front of people and I did that. And yet many people come up to you right after and say, that was so, so wonderful. And you're going like, okay, good. And to work out those problems is one of the reasons why I come to church.
On a sunny day in September, a stern-faced, plainly dressed man could be seen standing on a street corner, still, in the busy Chicago Loop. As pedestrians hurried by on their way to lunch or business, he would solemnly lift his right arm and, pointing to the person nearest him, intone loudly, "Guilty." Without any change of expression, he would resume his stiff stance for a few moments, and then again the inexorable raising of his arm, the pointing and pronouncing of the one word, "Guilty." The effect of this strange pantomime on the passing strangers was extraordinary. They would stare at him, hesitate, look at each other, look back at him again, and hurriedly continue on their way. One person turning to another was heard to exclaim, "But how did he know?" So writes Dr. Carl Menninger in a book titled Whatever Became of Sin. Whatever Became of Sin. A colleague of mine reflecting on Menninger's story asked if someone on the street suddenly pointed at you and pronounced guilty, what would come to your mind? Of what sins are you guilty, she asked. Overwork? Self-indulgence? Guilty of a few little white lies? Overdue library books? Guilty of uncharitable thoughts? Of raising your voice or hand to another person in anger? Of keeping the extra $5 the cashier gave you in error when you paid for a purchase? Guilty of judging harshly someone whose beliefs or opinions are different than yours? Or you might just write the person off. Most of us probably would. But sin, as a religious concept, as a concept coming out of the Christian tradition, in the cultural tradition that most of us living in this part of the world are steeped in, sin is a translation from those old and new Hebrew and Christian scriptures, a translation of a couple of different words. It's either from the Greek hamartia or the Hebrew hata. And while that Old English word that they translated to, sin, carries with it the weight of guilt, of wrongdoing that we associate with the word, the words in the original text, they didn't have that meaning at all in their cultural context. Both of those words, hamartia from the Greek, the hata from the Hebrew, they were sporting terms. No. Hamartia was about a bad toss of a spear. Hata, an arrow shot that didn't quite hit the gold mark at the center of the ring. It might have even hit the target, just not the bullseye, the gold center. Literally, hata means to go astray. And I know for some of us, even that idea of going astray might not be language that feels entirely comfortable. You might know the story of a young Unitarian who was visiting a Christian church when the pastor asked if she was saved. And she whispered, "In my church, we aren't allowed to get lost." Or there's an old quip about the two strands of our tradition. It says that the Universalists, they believed that God was too good to damn anyone to hell, while the Unitarians believed that they were too good to be damned to hell. But what if when we're talking about sin, what we're talking about is not a moral or spiritual failure, not a source of unhealthy guilt or shame, but rather this more neutral observation of missing the mark? It just didn't hit the target that it was intended for. It changes the whole meaning, right? And part of what this understanding of sin does is it shifts us from thinking about intention to thinking about impact. It shifts from being about the intentions, leaves behind all that nonsense about impurity, about trying to live up to an unachievable moral standard. Instead, it's about simply observing the truth of the impact of our actions. And the truth of the impact of our actions is that they sometimes miss the mark. I have a fundamental faith in good intentions. And I'm sure in many ways it was a product of my Unitarian upbringing, the countless covenants that I made in Unitarian youth groups that included the phrase, assume good intentions. So one of the ways we covenant to be with one another, to treat one another, assume good intentions. And so I believe that there are good intentions underlying everything that anyone ever does. Even when there are intentions to harm, I really do have faith that there is a deeper pull towards beautiful and universal human needs. That it's ultimately not intent, but desperation, short-sightedness, ignorance, fear that lead to tragic and horrific acts. And my faith in good intentions, it doesn't leave me to rest easy about the impact of human action. During a wave of anti-racism, anti-oppression work in our Unitarian youth movement, an accompanying phrase was added when we would covenant to assume good intentions. It was a phrase that would call us, it would be worded in different ways, but call us to awareness that impact sometimes lands far from intent. And we struggled in that community, in those communities for years, and we struggle still to talk about these dynamics in a way that honors the good intentions, acknowledges the good intentions, but also takes seriously the impact from the point of view of those impacted. And I think our whole culture is in need of language to talk about the unintended impact of our actions. It doesn't have the connotation of sin that maintains the inherent worth and dignity of every person, but speaks to this basic fact of our lives, that we all miss the mark. That the impact of our actions sometimes has very little to do with our intentions, that no one hits the gold at the center of the target every time. Because we hurt one another. Whether we want to or not, intend to or not, feel terrible about it or not, we hurt one another. It's the price of that interdependent web that we like to talk about. That interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, it sounds so romantic and beautiful. I don't know about you, but for me it conjures some kind of forest image, the great tall cedars providing shelter and shade to maybe a deer, and then the deer's droppings being mulched into compost and feeding the tree's roots, and this kind of pastoral image, right, of this beautiful interdependent web. Or maybe gossamer strands lacing heart to heart, no one left unconnected. For me, it truly is an image of the holy, of the ground of being. And yet, the web, it's also the tricky, sticky spider's trap. It's a dangerous place of predator and prey, a place of harm that happens with or without intent. We cause harm because of the very nature of our connectedness. To exist is to exist in relationship, and the push and pull of relationship invariably involves missing the mark. Reverend A. Powell Davies was a leading light of our tradition in the mid-20th century. He was minister for many years at All Souls Unitarian in Washington, D.C., and was well known in the community and throughout our faith for his thoughtful activism, his principled, ethical stances. And for him, it was this very tension between intentions and impact, between his high ideals and his self-understanding of the likelihood of missing the mark, that was the central purpose of church. This is what he said. He said, "Let me tell you why I come to church. I come to church, and would whether I was a preacher or not, because I fall below my own standards and need to be constantly brought back to them. I'm afraid of becoming selfish and indulgent. And my church of the free spirit, brings me back to what I want to be. I could easily despair, doubt and dismay could overwhelm me. My church renews my courage and my hope. It's not enough that I should think about the world and its problems at the level of a newspaper report or magazine discussion. It could too soon become too low a level. I must have my conscience sharpened until it goads me to the most thorough and responsible thinking of which I am capable. I must feel again the love I owe to others. I must not only hear about it, but feel it. In church I am brought toward my best, in every way toward my best." And I share in his faith in church. But I'd also add and vice versa to the end of that quote. You know, what I mean is, we need our community to call us back again and again to our highest values, yes, but also it is the individuals of a community who call our institutions to live with courage and hope themselves. Because, you know, our religion has this history of lofty intentions. That 1568 Edict of Torda, a landmark in religious and ethical history. Here's just a few words from it. There's a couple of gendered pronouns, which we would change today, but I'll give you the original. "In every place the preachers shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it. And if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would be not satisfied, but they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve of. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, and it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment." At a time when the rest of the continent was ablaze with religious war and persecution, Francis David convinced King John Sigismund to issue this proclamation of religious tolerance. Some recent research by Reverend Dr. Susan Ritchie was shown that there was likely influence from the nearby Ottoman Empire. Right? That was their closest neighbor, where Islam's establishment of religious tolerance had been in place far before Christians started thinking about it. But living up to the grand intentions of the Edict of Torda, it's not been as simple as words from a great preacher or proclamations from the one and only Unitarian king. Just a decade later, in that place, Francis David dies imprisoned, convicted for the crime of theological innovation. A few centuries later, in that place, all religion is forbidden, the social experiment enforced by a harsh totalitarian regime. And it's tempting, I think, for us to see ourselves as Unitarians only in a benevolent, kind of innocent light in this story. We Unitarians, we stand for tolerance. We're pioneers of tolerance. Others have been the persecutors. And yet when I hear that line, no one shall be reviled for their religion by anyone, I'm reminded that we still have a long way to go, even in our communities, even here. Because without casting aspersions, without throwing shade on anyone's intentions, it's important to acknowledge that there is somewhat of a tendency among us to look down on, or at least askance at, those with different beliefs than our own. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a meeting with the Sunday service team. And I can't remember exactly what we said, but there was a bit of joking around about the way that Catholics do things. I don't remember what exactly was said, but I remember I certainly participated in the joking around. I participated myself. That's easy to do. And then we were all awakened for a moment, awakened from our intolerance by one member of the group who spoke up and basically said, I grew up Catholic. And there's still parts of that tradition that are meaningful to me. And, ouch, basically. And there was that moment of pause. That moment of taking account of what had just been said, of opening ears to how another in the group had experienced those words, that moment of waiting to see how the group would respond to the new truth being introduced. A teacher of mine says, conflict is simply new information entering the system. Conflict is new information entering a system. Journalists and bloggers, media of every kind have been wrestling with this question of impact and intention for months as part of the Me Too, the hashtag Me Too conversation. People are wrestling with this tension between needing to believe immediately the stories of those stories shared by folks who've been assaulted or even raped in the face of a culture and justice system that has failed victims of sexual violence again and again. This need to just believe first it's real. But that then in tension with valuable principles about due process, about innocence until proven guilty. Some stories that have come out have us wondering what to do about behavior that is ugly and harmful, but may not be assault or abuse, how to draw those lines, how to care for those who've been hurt, how to respond to those who've done harm. As men who have been previously untouchable by consequences are being awoken to the harmful impact of their actions, one line has echoed through many of their responses. I never intended for anyone to feel like that. You read that line? I understand now I made so many women feel this way. That couldn't have been further from my intent. But you know that old saying about good intentions and where they lead to? Are you with me? Thanks. So, like I said, I believe in good intentions. I honestly believe men who have done harm when they say they had good intentions. But when someone who's been hurt by your actions is speaking up, when someone who you have power over is finally getting their time to share their story, it's not time to talk about your good intentions. No, in that moment, your intentions do not matter. I'll tell you, I believe also the priests, the nuns, the ministers, and government officials and social workers who perpetuated cultural genocide across this country for more than a century had good intentions. I really believe they did. But that's beside the point. When someone who's been hurt by your actions is speaking up, when someone you have power over is finally getting their time to share their story, your good intentions do not matter. Now, the work of repair, of healing and reconciliation is complex and involves more than just listening. And a time for reckoning with intention is a part of the process often. As are tangible efforts to repair, restore, or at least reduce the harm done. But before any of that is possible, especially when there's an imbalance of power, there must be a deep understanding and honoring of the impact. That comes first. So this is a poem from the Unitarian minister Nancy Schaefer. It's called "Because We Spill Not Only Milk." Don't cry over that, but maybe it's worth crying over some other things. Because we spill not only milk, knocking it over with an elbow, when we reach to wipe a small face, but also spill seed on soil we thought was fertile but isn't, and also spill whole lives, and only later see in fading light how much is gone, and we hadn't intended it. Because we tear not only cloth thinking to find a true edge and instead making only a hole, but also tear friendships when we grow, and whole mountainsides. Because we are so many. And we want to live right where the black oaks lived, once very quietly and still. Because we forget. Because we forget not only what we are doing in the kitchen and have to go back to the room where we were in before, remember why it was we left, but also forget entire lexicons of joy and how we lost ourselves for hours, yet all that time were clearly found and held. And also forgot the hungry, not at our table. Because we weep not only at jade plants caught in freeze and precious papers left in rain, but also at legs that no longer walk, or never did, although from the outside they look like most others, and also weep at words said once, words said as though they might be rearranged, but which once loose refuse to return. And we are helpless. Because we are imperfect and love so deeply, we will never have enough days. We need the gift of starting over, beginning again. Just this constant good, this saving hope. Just this constant good, this saving hope, this gift of starting over, beginning again, because we are imperfect. My colleague Elizabeth Wynn likes to say, the good news is we are already saved from perfection. We are already saved from perfection. And I know that you're probably too good to need saving, those of us in this room. But isn't that good news? This is the blessing. This is the blessing at the heart of the hard truth of intention and impact. There's nothing wrong with us for missing the mark. There's nothing wrong with us for missing the mark. There's no other way to live. It's what we do. We are all going to mess up again and again. Hallelujah. And if we can get out of the way, just get out of the way long enough to hear how we've impacted others, we just might be able to begin the process of starting over yet again, to take another shot at the golden center. Maybe so. I love you.